Hey there everyone. If you've been following all the posts which I've been doing on Facebook and the forum for the last couple of years really, I do regular posts talking about the new set effects that are coming out. In those posts I say whether or not the effect is good and I link to this guide. I've got two guides on the forum, one for equipment, one for trinket set effects. And in these I detail all that are there. I also detail the top 5 as well as some other ones which are special mentions. Now these guides are built for you to go and read and find out which ones are the good ones and that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of information, as well as this is not talking about specific classes. A lot of people come to me and they ask, I play Knight, which set effects are the best ones for me? And it's true, it is slightly different depending on which class you play. So I'm bringing out 3 videos now, and you'll know which class this particular video is covering because it's in the title of the video. And in each of these I'm going to go through the best equipment and trinket set effects. Now before we go through that, I'm going to first talk about set mixing. That is something which I briefly mention in these guides but don't go into great detail on, so we're going to talk about that in detail first of all, before then talking about the equipment set effects and the trinket set effects. There are links in the description to these guides as well as to those points in the video. I will also say that for each of these 3 videos, they each start exactly the same with the set mixing. I am basically making this as something which I can put on the start of all 3 videos. So if you've seen it for one of the videos, just skip forwards to the equipment and trinkets part. So to talk about set mixing first of all, the reason why we want to do set mixing for the set effects is because you have to set mix if you want to get any of the older effects. We pretty much need to replace our sets that we get with the new sets each time, with the stats increase each time, and we need to keep up in order to be able to crit in events and get good damage and that kind of stuff. So we need to be replacing them with the new sets. However, we might want to keep some of the older effects. And so in order to be able to set mix, it's important to know what you're losing by set mixing. So if you look at the set bonus here for equipment, we mainly want to look at the last one, so the 8 out of 8. All you get is the set effect, which if you're using a different glove for a different set effect, doesn't really matter, there's just a trade-off. You're losing the current one to gain a different effect. The other loss you're making is, in this case, 200 damage. Now that is not really that much, it doesn't matter at all. So really on equipment there is basically no loss by set mixing to add an old fabled glove. So you can choose whichever set effect you want. I mean, there's a bit of loss on stats on the exact glove, but like that doesn't matter. The effect you're adding is so important, so much more powerful, that it is absolutely worth your time set mixing to get a glove, an old fabled glove. Now for appearance, I want to mention set mixing here. Obviously there is no set bonus for a set effect, but if you have the VIP items, you may consider maybe thinking about doing set mixing here. For Knight, this is it's only worth it for Knight, maybe. Now the reason being is if you look at the 8 out of 8, there is crit damage rating. Crit damage rating is so important for our damage output that it's only worth losing that if what you're gaining is massive. Now for Wizard and Archer, the thing that you'd want to gain by set mixing, you want multiple copies of the 3 out of 8 set bonus, and that health is just not high enough. It's not worth doing the set mixing to get multiple copies of that. You're just going to lose so much more by losing that crit damage rating. However, for Knight, the health bonus is much larger, and it may be worth doing as a massive trade-off that you lose the damage output by losing all the crit damage rating for more defense with a much more health. I still probably wouldn't recommend that, but if you want to go full tanky Knight, which Knights are kind of tanky enough already, if you want to do that, then that is a trade-off you might consider. It's a lot more worth your while if you have the VIP items, so you can get many copies of that health bonus. It makes it a little bit more worth it if you're getting many copies of that. So going to trinkets. Trinkets is a little bit more complicated. However, it's where you can potentially get probably the biggest bonus, at least for Wizard and Archer. So the way the armor and health bonus works as the 3 out of 8 for equipment, appearance and trinkets is that for Knight the bonus is much higher on all 3. However, trinkets are used with exactly the same stats for Archer and Wizard, so they have a lot more armor and just armor for set mixing with trinkets. So it's a place where it is possible to set mix. As you can see I'm doing here, I'm using a VIP necklace and a VIP talisman so I can get 6 versions of that armor set bonus, which gives me a lot more armor than I would otherwise have. Now this is something which is generally considered to be the best thing right now, and I haven't ever highly recommended it. Maybe more recently I've mentioned it a bit more as being good, especially because, you know, I do it myself. I can't really say it's bad if I'm doing it myself, but I didn't recommend it years back because the thing is, if you look at the 8 out of 8 set bonus here, it gives crit rating. Crit rating is another important stat, just like the crit damage rating, and as that increases, it becomes harder and harder to do the set mixing while still being able to crit with your character. Both wizards and knights can somewhat get around this because they have auto crit skills that make everything crit for a short time, but archers don't, so archers will struggle the most to continue doing this as it goes into the future. And it may be the case that, you know, no class actually wants to set mix on their trinkets. We'll have to see how things go, but I'm just saying that for looking into the future, that set mixing on trinkets may be something that people don't want to do in the long run. But for now, it's just about fine, and the best way to set mix on trinkets is to get 2 fabled rings with 2 powerful set effects. So you choose those to be anything you want, and then because the dodge rating and the max mana, those set bonuses at 5 and 7, you don't need those at all. It doesn't matter about trying to get the 5 or 7. Instead, what you can do is with the 6 remaining items, you can get 2 versions of the 3 out of 8 set bonus. So you do 3 items from one set and 3 items from another set. I'm obviously not doing this because I'm using the VIP trinkets, but that's what you would do. So that's what I would recommend to everyone. As long as the crit rating isn't causing you problems, you can do that, and then you can use 2 rings, which are any rings you like, with powerful set effects on them. So I hope that covers the set mixing in general, and should hopefully have us all on the same page. So you know, this is what we do in order to get the fabled rings and the fabled gloves onto our characters. Fabled glove, very easy to do, and the fabled rings might have some issues with crit rating in the long run, but for now it is possible to set mix with both fabled rings to get 2 set effects here, and then also having the double armor bonus from 2 lots of 3 out of 8. So we're going to take a look through all the equipment set effects. Now, equipment set effects in general, they are all for damage output. There are a few which give some kind of defense buffs, but ultimately most of them are for damage output, and that is what they do best. So bear that in mind as we look through them. For the other 2 classes, there is one glove that just stands out well above the rest. For archers, there's actually a second one that's kind of in contention with it. So that's where we mainly differ from the other 2 classes. But this first glove we're going to look at, the Shining Crystal gloves. This is the best overall. It gives such insane buffs. That damage buff is basically better than most of the other damage buffs that are available on gloves. The defense buff is insane. If you combine that with any kind of other damage reduction, you're pretty much invincible. There's a little bit of damage reduction on the archer class in some of the skills, but you can also get them from other set effects too. Then the move speed, the stun, altogether it's just insane. And with the 30-second cooldown, it's really hard to beat this with any other glove. This is pretty much the glove to pick up and just use everywhere. However, for a few bits of content, you may want to use certain other gloves. So we're going to have a look at this one in combat. I just want to say quickly first, I am calling these all gloves, but the screenshots you're seeing are vambraces because these are the wizard versions of the gloves. They're all called vambraces on wizard, but they're gloves on archer. So if there's any confusion there, that's what I'm doing. So anyway, let's have a look at it in some combat. I'm going to attack this this boss here, and you'll see at some point there'll be a blast, and then I go light. You can see they're all stunned. I can run around a bit faster. I've also got damage reduction at this point. Yeah, that's the insane buff there. So those gloves, pretty much the best overall. You can't really go wrong with them. But the next pair of gloves is the Swift Scales gloves. Now, for the other 2 classes, these are great for water builds, but for archers, they're just best amazing anyway. This is probably the most damaging glove out of any of the gloves by a long way. Compared to the Shining Crystal vambraces that we just looked at, it completely outclasses the damage buff that you get there. and if you're a water build, it's going to be extreme. So even if you're not a water build, this is going to be like an extra skill on top of your basic attacks. You can do up to 6 attacks per second when you're in PvE. It's a little bit slower in PvP, and a little bit slower in Guild Raid. However, in PvE you're going to do 6 attacks per second, so that 4% is going to trigger roughly every 4 seconds. And 300% water every 4 seconds, bear in mind that does crit, it does get increased by elemental stats. That's like using a powerful water skill every 4 seconds on top of your attacking, just on top of what you'd normally be doing on Archer. So if you've got a water build, that is incredibly powerful, and otherwise it's just strong. Now the 250% non-elemental done in an area is less important. It's basically single target, massive damage to one enemy. And yeah, having no cooldown, having just a chance the whole time, means the more basic attacks you do, the more powerful it's going to be. So let's have a look at this in some combat. And I would, if I was an archer and I had a water build, or just, reasonable water, I would probably be using this as my PvE glove at all times, maybe in PvP too, just to have some more damage output. Now you can see that blue blast that's going on, hitting the other enemies, doing a bit of damage to them, but also considerable damage to the enemy I'm attacking. So it happens every few seconds, as I said, and great damage gloves. So those are the main 2 gloves that you want to sort of consider on Archer, mainly for damage output. The first glove gives defense 2 and other benefits. The rest of the gloves are more kind of niche use that you might want to use in certain bits of content. So the next glove we're going to look at is the Alex CUA, the Creator's Glove. This is one that I've mentioned on the other 2 classes, and I'd say it's a bit weaker on, I mentioned it on the other 2 classes. I think I just mentioned it on Wizard. I'm not mentioning it for Knights. It's a little weaker than it is for Wizards. I think for Wizards they can utilize it really well, but on Archer, Decoy is a little more solid than the Drakes are. So this is for really tough PvE content, when the enemies, they one-shot you, or they just kill you really easily, and you need a decoy there at all times. For that content, I generally recommend use a cooldown potion, use a screen for decoys so that you can have multiple decoys out at the same time, and you're pretty much good to go. Like a dragon on top of that, maybe a stone bear as well, you can probably put up enough defense. But if you want a little extra, then this is where you can get it. That indestructible hound, it's going to come out from time to time. It's going to be out there for about a quarter of the time, just a little under a quarter. I should say fifth, because there's a bit of time before it triggers, so about a fifth of the time, and it's going to be indestructible and stuff. And when it's out there, you don't need to put a decoy out. You can then time your decoy for the end of that, and survive better that way. So that's what this glove's for. We're going to have a look at it in some combat now, so you can see what's going on with it. So after a few seconds, we've got the hound there. It's a bit slow to running to the enemies, but you can see the enemies have surrounded it. They're going to attack it. It's going to hit the enemies for pathetic damage, but you can see it doesn't get killed. It's completely indestructible for those 10 seconds. So yeah, that's that glove there. Now the next glove we're going to talk about, this one is for PvE damage, or for guild raids, or maybe PvP. It's an interesting one for Archer because the other 2 classes have access to an auto crit skill, a skill that makes all their skills guaranteed critical for the next few seconds, and with cooldown potion they can have them relatively frequently. On Archer you can't guaranteed crit, so if you're in really tough content then and you're not critting there, then this might be a way to get little sections of a lot of damage. Now the problem with it is it's only for 5 seconds and the cooldown's 45 seconds, so it's not that frequent. However, it might be something that you want to be using. In guild raids, our crit rate is set to 50%, so this is one of the gloves that actually is very good for increasing your damage output in guild raids. It's only going to trigger at one point in the guild raid, but over those 5 seconds you're going to deal a lot more damage, so it gives you a little boost to the overall damage. It's hard to sort of find some things which boost your damaging in guild raids, but this is one that can. This is probably, it's either this or the next one we're going to talk about, or the Swift Scales gloves. One of those 3 is probably going to be the best one in guild raids for you, so I'd recommend to try them all and see which kind of works out best. So in PvP as well, our crit chance is a little lower, and this is a way to get a lot of damage output for 5 seconds. It's not going to be that frequent when it happens, but when it does happen, it's going to make you have incredible damage for those 5 seconds. So it might be a great way to kind of help finish someone off. And of course, if you're dying, then the set effect, the 45 seconds, gets reset, so you can do it, and it'll be the next time you start attacking someone, you'll get this auto crit. And it might be a way to really effectively take people out. If you're frequently dying and having to go and just try and get one kill. So yeah, it can be good for that. So let's have a look at this in some combat. It's a little harder to see the set effect for this one. You have to look at the feet of your character, and suddenly it will sort of burst into red. You can see right now it's happened. I've got this red effect around me, and then all attacks will crit during that time. Okay, so the next set effect to talk about is the Sacred Warrior gloves. Now these gloves, unfortunately, it's a later set effect. It doesn't work unless you have all 8 of the items. Hopefully they will fix this at some point. I'm just going to assume that it's going to be fixed and that we can use the glove by itself. But anyway, this effect is for guild raid damage. It could also be PvE damage, if it gets fixed and we try it out and see exactly how good it is. But anyway, it's an incredibly strong effect, giving 20% more damage to any enemies pulled in. It's a permanent effect on them too. It's actually kind of fun in PvP if you do this on someone and they take 20% more damage for as long as they're alive from everyone, not just you. It really puts a target on them. But anyway, this effect can increase your damage output quite a lot in a guild raid and that kind of stuff if it triggers, and probably is the best one for guild raid. But like I said, it's in contention between this, the previous one, and the Swift Scales gloves. Those are the 3 which could give you the best damage output. So I can't show this in some combat, unfortunately. I don't have the full set right now. I'm not going to show you with a full set. So let's just move on to the next one. So the next one is actually 3. These 3 are 3 different types of elemental damage, and they're all efficient. There's a few different types of elemental damage in there, in the gloves set effects, which are just not quite good enough. These 3 are the best in their respective elements. So the fire and the nature ones, they give 300% every 30 seconds. Sorry, so 300% in an area of an element every 30 seconds. That's the kind of efficiency you're looking for if you want a particular type of elemental damage. So if you're really heavily in a certain elemental build and you want some elemental damage in that, maybe the enemies are weak to that element too, then that's where you may want to use these set effects. I would say they're a bit weaker generally than the other set effects out there, but they're worthy of note. The interesting one out of these 3 is the Hallowed Spirits gloves. These are not for... I haven't highlighted them in the other 2 classes because this one really depends on you doing basic attacks, a lot of basic attacks, because when it triggers for the next 3 seconds, you need to be doing as many basic attacks as possible to get the benefit out of it. However, for those 3 seconds, you're going to do an insane amount of shadow damage if you're able to consistently attack. So for archers, this is really good, and it's a lot stronger than the other 2 here. Now, it's not as strong as the Swift Scales gloves is for water, but it is very strong for shadow itself. And if you can get used to it, it's nice. The one downside about it is causing the enemies to flee can make it troublesome to try and attack lots. Also, they can run in different directions or whatever, and it can be tricky to actually try and continually hit them all for that time. But anyway, let's have a look at each of these in some combat. So we're going to start off with the nature one. I'm going to start attacking this enemy here, and you'll see that the green blast there. And then they continue to take some more damage over time, so it totals to 300%. Next is the fire one. So again, I'll just attack in the middle of them, and you'll see a meteor come down at some point after a few attacks. There we go, that's the massive meteor. It comes down, does a hit of fire damage to them all. And then lastly, the shadow ones. This will be a little harder to see, but you will see mainly with the enemies running away when it triggers. So I'm just going to group them together and attack this one in the middle. There we go. Okay, so now you can see there's blast, there's another blast. That's what happens there. So those are all the gloves. Just to quickly summarize, basically there's 2 which are the best for damage output, and the main 2 which you want to look at are the Shining Crystal gloves for the overall, just general brilliant buffs, and the Swift Scales gloves for insane water damage to a single target, especially good if you have a water build. Then you have the other ones which are for niche cases of certain elemental damage, or for critting and that kind of stuff in guild raids. The one thing I forgot to mention earlier for the auto crit glove is that it can be kind of useful if you're, say, trying to farm elite event really quickly, and you just want to go in there, you kill the boss in a few seconds, and then it's over, and then you restart the map and stuff. And most gloves won't really give any benefit if you're only attacking something for a few seconds. However, the Nature's Rest gloves, if you suddenly, if it triggers the auto crit each time, you're going to kill that boss maybe a little bit faster each time. So you don't need the buff for 10-15 seconds. It doesn't matter that the cooldown's for every 45 seconds, because you only need that buff for 5 seconds, making you take the boss down faster. So yeah, that's where that can also come into play a little bit. So anyway, that's it for equipment. So let's move on to the trinket set effects. Earlier on in the video, we talked about how equipment set effects are mainly about damage. Trinkets are the opposite. They're mainly about defense. And while the best set effect on the gloves, it does offer some defense, you may be wanting to use the Swift Scales gloves instead. But anyway, trinkets, you mainly want to think about how they're rounding off the defense on your class. So we get defense in a few different ways. There are some hero skills which give you defense, not a whole lot of that on Archer, so what you're really looking at more so is the set effects and also lifesteal. Now lifesteal is a really big factor on Archer. It doesn't matter so much in PvE because you have the decoy down, so like when you take damage, it's hard to be sat there attacking at the same time because you'll take a lot of damage. You need to really have the decoy down and stuff. But in PvP, lifesteal is an enormous factor for keeping archers alive. I get a lot of archers in general, and this is a slight side note, but I get a lot of archers talking about how archers have no defense. It's just barely any defense compared to the other classes and stuff, and they just make out that archers are going to just die from everything in PvP. Now, reality is not like that at all, because you've got these other factors, and I think if people include set effects, they include lifesteal in their class, and they just, use the skills as well, of course, but when that all comes together, archers survive brilliantly well, a lot more than you'd expect. Sorry if you can hear the siren in the background there, I don't know what's going on outside. Anyway, so bring that all together, and archers can actually survive very well. In PvP, I'm talking mainly there, but PvE as well, they got the decoy, and otherwise you can bring together these set effects to survive to, those times when they get past your decoy, they attack you, they do a bit of burst damage to you, you're not going to die if you have the right set effects on you. So, lifesteal, incredibly important. If you can get it up high from, mainly right now it's the elite spheres, they can give a lot of lifesteal. Even the fine quality ones, if you level them up, they start at 4%, but they get to 40% if you level them up. Having all that together, I know right now my wizard in the game has about 1000% lifesteal, and if I'm in PvP and I just do basic attacks, like I'm talking about a wizard here, not an archer, if I'm doing basic attacks on someone, it's actually really quite tricky for them to kill me. Now, as an archer, if I had 1000% lifesteal, sure, I wouldn't have the other defense buffs that wizards have, so I would be taking more damage, but I'm doing that healing from lifesteal while also properly attacking. If I do that on wizard, I'm not dealing any damage properly, but on archer, you can be doing damage while also healing yourself up. And if you've ever faced a top archer in PvP and they have this lifesteal stuff, you'll see that they are almost impossible to kill because of that lifesteal. So anyway, that's enough stress on lifesteal. We're talking about the set effects here, and rounding it off, I think the best set effect here for archers in general, very much like wizard class, it's to have a combination of a healing ring and a damage reduction ring. I think having both of them is important. Even if you have this lifesteal, even if using the first aid to heal yourself up, you kind of want this extra healing effect happening, and because you don't have that from the gloves at all. So having a healing effect where you don't have to be attacking an enemy is important, and then damage reduction all the way. So the best combination of healing and damage reduction is the Fire's Birthright Seal for healing, and the Aegis of Cementa Leota for damage reduction. You can see the effects here. That healing fountain heals you wherever you are in the map. 25% a second, it's going to keep you topped up really nicely. The extra move speed buff is handy too. Now, the annoying thing here is it triggers on basic attacks. That's not very good in PvE, especially for archers, because you really want it to be triggering when you need it. So, you know, if you're just attacking an enemy, probably you have a decoy out there, so it will trigger at the beginning when you have a decoy there and you're not even getting hurt. So not great for PvE front, but for PvP it's excellent because it's going to trigger when you get into combat. And the Aegis of Cemented Leotta triggers when you get hit, gives it enormous damage reduction that stacked with anything else is going to make you really tanky. And you know, if you have the Aegis of Cemented Leotta trigger while you're healing from lifesteal, even if you don't have that fountain, you're going to be practically impossible to kill. So yeah, really two strong set effects, and let's have a look at them in some combat right now. Let's look at the fountain ring first. So yeah, it's commonly known as the fountain ring. As you can see, triggered really quickly, and then we get the fountain there. You can't see the healing, but I ran around a little bit faster too. So that's that effect. And then, sorry, we need to go to the trinkets page. Then the Aegis of Cemented Leotta triggers when I get hit. You can see the effect here. It's a party buff of damage reduction. Very, very nice buff there. So really what we're looking at is alternatives to the healing and the damage reduction. Now, alternative healing, we have the White Forest seal. This is commonly known as the crystal healing ring. So it creates a crystal next to you. You heal up. It also stuns when it appears and when it ends. And that can be really handy. However, the slight issue with it, and why I think it's worse, is because the main reason because it can be destroyed. So it's not quite as efficient, not quite as reliable as the Fire's Birthright seal. Then we have, as an alternative to the Aegis of Cemented Leotta, the Earth Spirit seal. Now this is technically a stronger effect because it's the same damage reduction. It's not a party damage reduction, but it's the same damage reduction, but also stuns enemies. The issue though is the cooldown is longer. That 30-second cooldown is very important because when it's a 30-second cooldown and 5-second duration, that is happening really reliably, like really quite frequently. So yeah, that's why this isn't quite as good, but it's an alternative if you don't have the most powerful version. And then also we got the Phoenix Law seal. This gives damage reduction that's slightly less. Again, also it's got the longer cooldown, so it's less good overall. So let's have a quick look at these in some combat. The White Forest seal first of all. So there you can see it appears, it stunned the enemies, it's healing me up, but it also got destroyed before it ended. So it depends on the content. It can be pretty good in PvP. Some people prefer it, but personally I do not. Now I'll have a look at the White Forest seal, also the Earth Spirit seal. So this triggers on, oh no, it doesn't trigger on base attack, sorry. But as you can see, it's like a shield around you. It looks like a bubble shield, however, it's actually damage reduction. And then at the end, it does that blast and stuns the enemies. And lastly, from this group, we have the Phoenix Law seal. So this triggers on basic attacks, which I was incorrectly saying about the last one. So if I attack a few times, you can see they've got the bubble. It again looks like a bubble, but it's actually damage reduction. For that time. Now we talked about bubbles. There are health shields in the game. However, the health shields generally, I would say, are worse than damage reduction. It's just not really as good to have them. The numbers just don't work out. However, the strongest health shield in the game is the Ocean's Tear seal. Ocean's Tear or Tear. I'm not really sure which one it's meant to be. But anyway, this gives you a bit of move speed as well. And it gives you the most efficient shield. I mean, the shields are pretty much all the same size, that 25% health shield, but it's got a good cooldown on it too. So anyway, let's have a quick look at this in some combat. So again, it's like a bubble, except this actually is a bubble. Health shield that's going to keep you alive for a bit. It lasts quite a nice long time as well. To summarize quickly what we've said so far, it's best to have a combination of healing and damage reduction. The best two we've mentioned, and then there are some alternatives that you can use to swap out for that healing ring or the damage reduction ring if you don't have the best options. I mentioned health shields briefly, but I don't recommend doing it. They're just they're weaker than damage reduction. So beyond here, we're talking about niche cases, certain bits of content where you might want to use something different. What we're going to talk about first is the defense in PvE. So like I said earlier on, the healing ring, that fountain ring, is not very good in PvE for actually working when you want it to work. It's also maybe better to go with like double damage reduction in order to survive in those tougher bits of content. I mean, if you stack two defense buffs together, you become basically invincible, which is, quite rare on Archer. You wouldn't think that Archers could do that. So that can be better than the healing in those cases. You've also got the potions to heal up, so maybe you don't want to use healing for that reason. So anyway, some other options for PvE defense. There's also this Salty's Rain Seal. Now this is very interesting. It works exactly how you want it to work. For a PvE setting, getting hit and then creating the dummy next to you. It will happen when, say your decoy's down and they start attacking you, and you're running away from some enemies that are chasing after you, and so they're hitting you a little bit. Then suddenly the dummy will appear, and you running away will mean you get the other side of the dummy. So it's like an extra decoy that comes out just when you want it to. If you can get used to how it plays, then you can use this really quite effectively. It also slows the enemies down next to it, which is great because if they're still closer to you than they are to the dummy at the time it appears, they will be running towards you. But if they get slowed, then as you run away, hopefully you'll run away faster, and then they will turn and run towards the dummy instead. So works really effectively, great for archers in PvE. This is the only case where I'm actually mentioning this. It's not good for the other classes, but for archer I believe it's really good. And then of course we have the same effect that we talked about for gloves. I'm not going to talk about it here really, creating the hound. It's basically an option between this glove, this ring or the glove. You can get the effect from either one. If you want to be using a better glove like the shining crystal gloves, then you can still get this effect except by equipping this ring instead. So I would recommend swapping either of these out for the the Aegis of Cementaliota for PvE if you're in really hard content, or otherwise you could just swap out the healing ring for another damage reduction ring. Having two of those could be better off. You could be better off with those rather than any healing effect, especially because you're going to be healing up from lifesteal as long as you can get back to attacking. So anyway, let's have a quick look at these in combat. I'll show the Salty's Rain. The Salty's Rain seal first of all. I'm just going to equip it here. Alright, so as I get hit, it will trigger. Oh yeah, it did trigger over there. I didn't even notice it. So the dummy appeared very quickly. It appears like sort of randomly around where you are, I think. I can't remember if it has any particular location it appears. But anyway, that was it there. Dummy appears and you can run away and the enemies get distracted. And we've already shown the Hound Ring, so I'm not going to bother showing that. The Aegis of Cementaliota we saw already before as well. So the next bit of content which you may want to use something different for is the guild raids, where you want damage. Like in guild raids you don't need any kind of defense, you just want some rings which give you some kind of damage output. So the options there, basically there's just 3 in total. There are 2 of the same effect, the Burning Might Seal and the Fireburst Band. These do stack up together in order to get an extra damage buff. These 2 I would say are the best. 20% damage buff that you will get because you're attacking with basic attacks, and it will just then remain stacked up at 20% for the duration of the guild raid. Using these 2 together is pretty much the best way to do it. So you want these for guild raids. Again, also, it's similar to when I was saying earlier on about equipment set effects. Right at the end of that section, I mentioned about the auto crit being a good way for just taking a boss down really quickly. If you're trying to do a bit of content, just farm it over and over and you want to do it quickly, you might find the auto crit gloves actually the most effective way to do that. And these 2 rings, similarly, if you don't really need any damage reduction from your rings, you can bring in these 2 rings and make you do the kill the boss bit faster each time. They're not going to make a huge effect, but they will make some reasonable, noticeable effect. So there's those two rings, and then finally, just before we show them, I'm going to talk about this ring, which we're not going to show. This ring is an identical copy of the Hallowed Spirit gloves, which we talked about earlier on for shadow damage. Again, you can just choose to use either one for the effect. They don't stack up together. If you have both on, then it just increases the chance of it happening sooner. It doesn't reduce the cooldown or anything like that. So anyway, this is another way to get damage output. If you have a shadow build or something, you may want to be using this for general PvE content or that kind of stuff. So yeah, useful bit of source of shadow damage, quite powerful. But for guild raids, you probably want to be using both of these other two rings, which we're now going to show. So if I stand back and I start attacking, you'll see the effects go on. You can see they're happening really frequently because I got both of the rings. Increases the chance on each basic attack happening. They stack up together. And if we look at my damage stat here, I'm at 81,000. I just went down to 75. Let's stack it up again. If I keep the basic attacks going, it will stack up to the maximum. Okay, so we're up at 81, and then you can see it going back down to 75. So little damage boost, that's what they do. And that's it. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it. I hope it's made everything clearer. At the end of the wizard one, I did a little summary of the which rings were the best and stuff. I'm not going to do that because I already did a summary earlier on. Said everything I want to say, other than I just want to say this is up to these gloves and rings, the ones in this video. They're only including up to a certain number in my guide. I can't remember the exact number right now, but basically anything released after that fact is not included in this video. But what they're doing is they're basically repeating a lot of the same set effects. So it's just a case of looking here and looking at what the set effects actually is rather than the exact ring or glove it's on. So you can wear a more up-to-date version of that ring or glove, pick it up in some event and use that instead. Or otherwise use this as a base point to sort of understand what's good and what's bad and what you might be wanting to use for the different bits of content. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video soon.